Joining us now on the program is the co-founder of Detroit Will Breathe, an organization fighting against police brutality and systemic racism in Detroit and beyond. Tristan Taylor joins us now on the MegaCast. Tristan, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Appreciate having you on. So first off, for those that may not be familiar with your organization, tell us about Detroit Will Breathe.
Well, Detroit Will Breathe was formed in 2020 in the heat of the movement for Black Lives. And we are an organization that was formed in order to give an organized and collective voice to like the people who are protesting, who wanted to not only bring accountability to the police department, but who really were thinking about how to deal with the structural inequality and racism that permeates our society, and what it would take to really eradicate and deal with those issues.
And Tristan, there's so many different contexts by which to understand these issues and to understand where we are at in our society in America and in the state of Michigan in terms of battling systemic racism and resolving these issues to create a more equitable society. And I think unfortunately, one of those disparities that makes this so clear is in the reaction from law enforcement in particular when we have incidents like we had over the weekend in Buffalo, where there was a shooting at a supermarket in Buffalo that took several lives. The shooter, it was later revealed the shooter's motivation for this incident was racially motivated, and yet he's brought in seemingly so peacefully, brought in to be arrested after that incident, whereas we've seen so many times that people of color, that black people, are taken in and with great force, sometimes even killed or severely injured as they're being arrested. So as you're watching what unfolded in Buffalo over the weekend, and the story is coming in initially with the reaction to the shooting and the way that this person was apprehended, what were your thoughts especially on how that reflects systemic racism as it pertains to arrests in the United States?
Well, I think it reflected two things. One, to me, the broader question of why people feel emboldened to make these attacks, I think is one that needs to be talked about, because my feeling is with the way in which we fail to prosecute and bring justice people who do harm to Black bodies, in particular the police, it just sends a message that you can attack us without impunity. And the second thing is, along your point about the grace almost in which white assailants is what you might call them, right, or whatever, are handled versus Black people who face brutalization for minor traffic stops, right? Patrick Leola died for a minor traffic violation. And it makes you question the whole intent of like the police and what their role actually is, what purpose they serve. And it also questions, how all the ways in which we express a lack of value for Black and brown lives.
Yeah, and it's reflected in the rhetoric that surrounds these incidents. You mentioned, and you said something that I thought was very interesting and thought-provoking, which is that the rhetoric that is out there inspires these acts of racially motivated violence that we saw in places like Buffalo, and we've seen in so many other places of late, where these so-called assailants go into different locations with the goal of shooting and killing as many people as they can, that simply with the simple motivation of, I'm killing them because they fail to be white. And that speaks to a greater danger that is out there that is motivating this, and that's some of this political rhetoric that is out there that's being inspired by those that are in power in certain political spectrums in the U.S., and the way that they inspire these people to come out of the woodwork and then be accepted, or maybe accepted, it's not the best word for that, but be a little bit more, let's say, pampered as they're being brought in. When these incidents happen, when you have an act of violence that's being committed by somebody that is white and male, especially straight white and male. Often the wording that comes in afterward is troubled, or they have issues, or they were frustrated, which doesn't do justice to the fact that they killed people. They aim to kill people because of the color of their skin, because of the way that they are, because of who they are, and that act of violence should not be acceptable in any way. And so when you hear these kinds of words coming through, when you're referring to white assailants, but then you have someone that's committing maybe a minor incident and is brought in safely and does cooperate with the police and then gets brutalized in the process, be called something like a thug, how does that make you as a black man feel?
Well, a couple of things. One, you used the word accepted, and I thought about that, and I was like, well, some of these folks have been accepted, right?
Yeah.
I think about Kyle Rittenhouse, right? I think about the January 6th rioters, right? Who have been hailed as defenders of American democracy, as defenders of property. And so there is an element upon which these folks have been embraced. And when Patrick Leola was murdered by Grand Rapids Police Department, they made sure to release his traffic record to show that he had previous violations. They're always when Black and brown people are involved, trying to make us out as criminals from the beginning and troublemakers instead of being troubled, right? No one ever asked the question. Patrick Leola, for example, was a refugee from the Republic of Congo. He is a refugee that escaped violence and war. And to this day, there has not been a discussion about the troubles that he faced as a consequence of that. What we get instead is a toxicology report saying that, oh, well, actually, he was inebriated. So there you go. That's problematic, right? And that is problematic because it speaks to the ways in which the police actually not just uphold, but help instigate this narrative, right? This stereotype in the way that Black and brown people are treated. And in the way, white suspects are treated.
Yeah, and nobody's asking for more brutalization. Nobody is saying that, well, if you are bringing in Black people, if you're bringing in people of color in a way that is often violent, that should also be the way that you bring in everybody else. That's part of the problem, is the violence itself. But what you're speaking to is beyond that. It's the disparity in the way that certain people are apprehended versus other people, and the way that has not been properly addressed by the authorities. We've heard, especially in the wake of the murder of George Floyd in 2020 and the protests that mounted as a result of that incident, as well as many other incidents well before that, spanning decades, that the police need better training. They need to rethink their training. They need to go through sensitivity training. They need to go through implicit bias training. And in many cases, those have been implemented, but that's not quite enough. So when you, as a leader of an organization like Detroit Will Breathe, are in discussions with those in leadership positions, what are you urging them to be considering as they look into the present and the future and try to bridge these gaps and solve these issues that are serious and severe issues throughout our society?
Well, I mean, one of the things that I think we demand is for the persecution of police officers who are involved in violent crimes, right? And we want termination of officers who are part of using excessive force, or who partake in, illegal activity or behavior that is damaging, to people. The second thing is that we make a demand that we actually de-emphasize the role of police. And I put that lightly. The truth is, for us, the police serve no purpose but to enforce inequality, right? They don't protect us. They don't ever see their job as like protecting us, especially Black and brown people. They see their job as containing us, and treating us as like potential like criminals all the time. That's baked into like what policing is. And the only way to resolve that is by getting rid of it and replacing it with institutions and systems that actually look to deal with the problems that cause and create people to partake in like criminal activity, or like what it means to keep a neighborhood safe. If we don't have resources like for people in the neighborhood that can help them sustain themselves and their families, like it doesn't matter, right? If we keep throwing money at the police. But the most important thing is like we need to see accountability, and we need to see the persecutions of these officers involved, like who have these egregious records against them around like excessive force and complaints against citizens. There was a recent article in Deadline Detroit, for example, that showed extensively a problem within the Detroit Police Department in actually even suspending or bringing into making sure that they were disciplined for having egregious complaints against them. So that's our problem. Like we need persecution of these police officers, and we need to stop funding police departments. We need to be putting that money and resources into things that can actually help people be safe.
And you mentioned money and the resources, that those go so far when you actually invest in those resources in communities, when you have access to proper and helpful mental health care, when you have access to those that are able to properly and are properly trained to de-escalate situations and to bring a sense of calm and to bring a sense of humanity to situations that are often tense and highly emotional, and they should be, because they're intense moments of life. And to be able to have those resources, you see in communities that do have those resources, that crime numbers, so to speak, are lower, that these kinds of incidents aren't seen as often. But there are so many communities throughout the state of Michigan, throughout the United States, that simply do not have these kinds of resources, and the investment's not being made in these resources to bridge those gaps. How big of an impact does that have when you on those that may be in these kinds of situations, when they have nowhere to turn, and then you see, and then organizations like yours are out there and advocating for this? What sort of these programs does organizations like Detroit Will Breathe and others similar to it in Michigan and across the U.S., what sort of programs are they looking to be invested in these communities in place of such an emphasis on police intervention?
One of the things, for example, is like mental health services, right? And again, like the question of mental health certainly came up with the shooter in Buffalo. It always does, of these white mass shooters. It's never a question, though, of Black people like having need of mental health services, right? It's always, no, we're just criminals, and that's why we do what we do. We need, more public infrastructure that can not just do like job training, but just even be, places where like community programs can be offered and implemented, right? We need public schools, right? Every public school that I went to in Detroit is like closed. And we've had over 120 schools like closed in the city, and what that means for neighborhoods who the school served as a community hub is that they no longer have an anchor to keep them afloat. So we need schools, we need libraries, like I said, we need job training, like we need affordable housing, and we need more social workers, right?
Yeah, all these resources critical to communities in a number of different facets, not just on the subject of quote unquote crime or incidents in the community. They have impacts on a number of different levels. Taylor, another couple of minutes before we'll have to say goodbye today. Before I let you go, I wanted to give you an opportunity to give us some more information on if people are interested in participating in different events and programs with Detroit Will Breathe. How can they find out more information?
Well, definitely follow us on our social media pages. We both have like Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, and it's at Detroit Will Breathe. You can also go on the website, detroitwillbreathe.info, and check out, the postings of the latest campaigns or actions that we have there.
Tristan, thank you so much for joining us.
No, I appreciate you. Thank you.